Okay.
Hello, folks. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And I'm here with my good friend, the host of Around the World with D and Friends, D. Pierce. How are you, D?
Alrighty, how you doing, Joe?
I'm doing pretty well. Only I wasn't able to stream to Facebook tonight. I'm not sure why, but it wouldn't take the information. Okay, I wanted to go through StreamYard to get there, and I tried uh, uh, many times over a 6-hour period, but it kept on giving me an error on Facebook. So I decided what to do was to direct everybody to YouTube tonight, at least try to do that. In any case, we're streaming to YouTube and to Twitter tonight, and not to Facebook because of the technical problem.
So we need to share, especially to share the YouTube.
Share on YouTube, yeah, because if people come on YouTube, then we at least have a stream that will take the comments from everybody. And we'll,
Right.
see all the comments. Our topics for tonight are the Plan B of Donald Trump. Pepe Escobar talks about Plan B to Larry Johnson. And then there's a bunch of blogs, by Larry Johnson about, what's going on with Trump, what's going on with NATO, and they're short, but also very good. Roughly take about 15 minutes for each one, to cover each one. Okay, then we have a stream on ending the Gaza genocide. That's by Jeffrey Sachs and a collaborator. Oh, wait a minute. I skipped a video that we have on a new treaty that Iran signed with, the treaty is an Armenian treaty, and it's a very strong agreement. And the fact that happened is very interesting because the U.S. just got through signing a treaty with the Armenians in order to lease a corridor that borders on Iran. And they're leasing the corridor for 99 years. So it's basically a permanent lease. And so now with the Iranian strong agreement with Armenia, things are getting set up for a real conflict there. Anyway, we'll be talking about that. Then, as I said, we'll be talking about, ending the genocide in Gaza. Then we're going to be talking about the existential crisis inside of NATO. Larry Wilkerson had some very interesting words on that. And then we have some more from Jeffrey Sachs, this time a video, where he's talking about the Ukraine situation and the attempts of the United States to put a hurt onto BRICS. And finally, we've got a piece from the judge in Scott Ritter, and it's on what happened in Alaska, but from the viewpoint, of Moscow this time. Scott is going to try to deliver the viewpoint of, Moscow for us. So that's the program for tonight. So let us do some sharing.
Yes, that's what I'm doing, trying to share the YouTube link into different groups on Facebook.
Excellent.
And we'll
Excellent.
see if the people will join.
That'll be excellent. And I guess while you're doing that, I will start up the show. I've already shared on Facebook. So I'm going to share the first piece, which is a video. Larry Johnson is interviewing the world's greatest journalist, Pepe Escobar. I don't know if he's really the world's greatest.
But I like him. I
He's
like
very,
Pepe.
very good, and we all enjoy him.
Yes.
This video is on Donald Trump's Plan B. So here we go. It's altogether, it's maybe a little more than 7.5 minutes. It's short. Okay, but very good.
To let me just find it. Sorry, just a second.
No, we got plenty of time.
This is a Trump quote. He published it on Truth Social. Perhaps this particular sentence explains the whole thing from the Trump point of view. Okay, it was determined by all, very important, that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement, which would end the war, and not a mere ceasefire agreement, which oftentimes do not hold up. So in one sentence, he buries NATO, the EU, and Kiev.
Yeah.
We never heard this from Trump before. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think he's right. We never heard this from Trump before. It is a change in position, and it was quite sudden.
No, you're right.
And this happens to be exactly the Russian position. If you see all those spectacular tweets by Medvedev on X, basically this is what Medvedev is saying. This is what Lavrov has been saying for over a year. And this is what Putin has been saying since June last year.
Yeah, actually, I heard today, I think it was Alexander McDurris or one of the Duran boys, or Alex Christoforo, said that the Europeans had actually come out now today and basically endorsed that view of a peace agreement as opposed to insisting on a ceasefire.
It's part of a toxic Medusa post. Yes.
So the ceasefire now appears to be dead since the Europeans have come out and are now talking about going directly to a peace agreement. So Trump in that meeting with them must have scared everybody good and proper.
I read that a few hours ago. It's amazing. This is something that the European Commission never put it this way. Of course, first of all, if you have an IQ over room temperature, to quote our great friend Martyanov, by now you have noticed that your strategic defeat as Europeans is total and irreversible.
Yeah.
So you might as well try to readjust your position. They'll never admit it, but at least readjust the position.
Sure.
Considering that they are manual and they are not table. And finally, they are starting to get the picture. Okay, we have to go along with it. Of course, then if you go to Merz, you go to Macron, they continue to say the same bullshit, including today. But now this comes from the European Commission, which is much more powerful than any nation-state government. So this means there's an enormous difference now. We haven't heard on the same terms from NATO yet, but you can bet that from today to Monday, sorry, our show is on Monday, right?
Yeah,
So
this will be up on Monday.
yes.
Yeah, we're talking for everybody to know. We're talking on Saturday afternoon.
So Tutti Frutti or Rudy is going to adjust his position as well.
Yeah.
There's
So that was, of course, last Saturday. So this video is really a week old. Okay, it was actually just after the Friday meeting.
no question. And he's much more relevant than the European Commission. So, wow, the immediate impact of the summit is already in front of us. Another thing entirely, as you know very well, how to sell a peace agreement in caps, as was written by Trump in his post, to the US ruling classes, to the deep state, to the neocons, to the Atlanticist gang, to the Europeans, to NATO, EU, and to Kiev.
Mm-hmm.
It's practically impossible, right?
Yeah.
Which brings us to there must be a plan B already in the works from Trump's point of view and from Russia's point of view. And maybe we could have a very, very quick conclusion about it. Plan B for Trump is I did everything that I could. You, Europeans, you want to continue the war against Kiev? Very simple. It's your problem now. I have nothing to do with this. The United States has nothing to do with it. Of course, there is a condition. You have to buy all our weapons, pay in euros from now on, non-stop. Then it's your war, no problem.
Such a deal, isn't it? Such a deal. They have to buy everything from the United States at prices that are inflated, of course. And they may be paying for things before they actually receive those things.
We're watching Europe collapse.
Yeah, I don't think that's a very good deal for Europe. I wonder if it's really going to happen.
Trump knows that NATO and the EU, both, they cannot at the same time financially and militarily continue the war. Even one of these vectors is already.
There's only one way they can do it. That's if the EU changes its system so that it allows the nations of the EU to run substantial deficits. If they can run big deficits, then a lot of things would be possible. But they have to change the basic agreement of the EU, the Maastricht Agreement, okay, in order to do that. So that's probably going to be difficult. We're probably looking at the disbanding of the EU as one consequence of this.
Right, it's in their best interest.
I think it's in their best interest.
Enormous problematic. Can you imagine carrying both at the same time? They can't.
Right.
Are they going to go to major international banks and get money that they don't have, paying absurd interest rates to continue a war that they know they intimately know it's already lost? And with which weapons? There are not enough weapons even inside the US, as you know very well, Larry.
Oh yeah. The 7 years. Hey, you've got a 7 year. You're on the 7 year waiting list.
Exactly.
On a 7-year waiting list. Okay, so he said, so what are they going to do? Are they going to borrow money? Well, if they disband the EU and they all get back their currencies, then they would not have to borrow money. All they would have to do is issue their currencies.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's in their interest if they want to both keep their safety nets and continue to fight. Now, I don't know if continuing to fight is in their interest. I think that they ought to just say, well, this didn't turn out too well. Let's change our foreign policy. Far better.
So this should be the plan B. And plan B for Moscow is very, very simple. We continue to do what we're doing.
Yeah. They don't
Because
have
the
to
war
stop
will
until
be
there's
decided in the battlefield. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It is being decided right now in the battlefield. We'll continue like that. And the possibility of this front line crumbling in the next 3-4 months is going up.
Yeah, very, very.
I think there's the possibility the front line actually crumbling in the next 3 to 4 weeks, much less 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, I think quicker than that. Candidly, I'm going to talk to General Buzinski next Friday.
Okay.
Get his take.
Oh, yeah, and he has fresh information from the front lines.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah. He's. I remember when the last time I interviewed him, I asked him, because, it seems to me that there are 9 basic bridges, railroad bridges over the Dnieper River, and you take those down, you cut off the logistics. Basically will force
Cut off exactly.
the Ukrainian army to starve. And I said, why hasn't Russia done that? And he laughed and said, I've been asking that myself, which was hilarious. But then, as we got into it, it appears that at least in the initial stages, first year, 2 years of the war, Russia did, if they feared if they did that, they would have left the bulk of the Ukrainian army west of the Dnieper. And your goal is to demilitarize. That doesn't demilitarize. That just makes it more difficult for you to demilitarize. But now it appears that they've reached that stage where they can start disrupting those lines of communication, as they're called. Taking down bridges, blowing up railroad lines, and shutting down their ability to resupply the forces on the front.
Yeah, but they're going to probably save a bridge or two so they can cross the Dnieper themselves. At least that's what I think.
Because now the Ukrainian army is largely demilitarized.
Yeah.
But and it took, considering the Russian way of doing war, attritional war, this takes time.
Yeah, the last numbers I saw was that the Ukrainians are down to about 300,000 troops on the front lines, and Russia's got 650,000.
Plus, anybody that they can call another 100,000 to 200,000 like this if they need it.
Yeah, they've got probably at least another 600,000 to 700,000 reserves. Already in the pipeline.
Those figures, are astonishing. So it looks like it's not going to be long now. Till the end. And of course, it'll be even faster if there's a negotiated end. So it would be important if they could do that. So let's see if we've got any comments yet. No, I don't think we have any comments. We have about 12 or so folks here. Seems, according to my indicator, well, hopefully other people will join.
Yeah.
As we go through. But let us get on then. Would you like to read the first of our pieces, Lee?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
The snoring you hear. Colby's snoring here.
Colby snoring. Okay, let's see. What's the first one? Okay. I think I have an update.
Yes, Sonar 21. Wait a second. Oh, yeah, I'm open. Okay. Sonar 21. Trump still fails to understand Russia's fundamental reason for special military operation, but he's trying. It's dated 19 August 2025 by Larry C. Johnson. Okay. You wanna?
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I saw you were busy.
I was checking on something. I was a little confused about how many Larry Johnson pieces I have. I think I have only 3, actually, not 4.
Okay.
So that's interesting. Okay, there it is.
The Sokar oil terminal destroyed in Odessa. Despite claims from the Trump administration about the success of Monday's meeting with Zelensky and the European PIMP delegation, the prospect for a successful negotiation to end the war in Ukraine is zero. Trump continues to mistakenly believe that he simply needs to get Putin and Zelensky together, who will hammer out a detail. Trump labors under the false assumption that the war in Ukraine was caused in part by a personal tiff between Putin and Zelensky.
I know that's like a silly assumption.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
Putin has been very clear that he will only meet with Zelensky once the details of a Ukrainian surrender have been agreed upon. Trump also thinks that it is nothing more than a dispute over land, and that land swaps is the key to achieving a peace agreement. Here again, Trump displays profound ignorance about the legal status of Zaporizhia and Kherson, republics under the Russian Constitution. Putin cannot concede any of that territory to Ukraine any more than Trump can give Alaska back to Russia.
Just a comment here. Okay, after all the information that was fed to Trump by Putin, and by Lavrov,
Right.
how can he continue to believe these things?
It's ridiculous.
It's so damaging to have a president of the United States who is as dumb as Donald Trump.
Well, he's got all those people around him.
He's
That
got
feed him.
He's got all those people around him who feed him stuff, but a lot of this is due to the fact that he's simply stupid.
Right.
Or is he the first one who is simply stupid? Joe Biden was also very stupid. So we've now had 12 years of stupid people who were elected as presidents of the United States. And while I don't think Obama was stupid, he made a lot of mistakes for a lot of other reasons. There's also questions about the basic intelligence of George W. Bush before him.
Yeah.
I mean, so come on, people. We got to start electing some people who have some brains. That's got to be a qualification for the presidency.
I know.
I mean, you
They
can't.
end up being bored.
Yeah, you can't have people in it who are as good as being deaf, dumb, and blind.
Right.
I mean, this is. Please go on.
But there is some good news. Notwithstanding Trump's ignorance of Russia's reasons for starting the special military operation in February 2022, he is sincere about the reestablishing dialogue and normal diplomatic relations with Russia. At least that is what the Russians believe. During the Biden term in office, communication with Russia ended in January 2022. Now they have someone to talk to. Actually, several someones, which include Trump, Rubio, Radcliffe, and Witkoff. Russia is not going to back away from increasing military pressure on Ukraine in the last 24 hours. Russia hit two key oil refineries, i.e. the Kremenchuk oil refinery in the Poltava Oblast and the Sokar oil terminal depot in Odessa. The Kremenchuk oil refinery is known by PJSC, Ukretnafta.
Yeah, that's really a tongue twister.
I
Okay.
The ownership,
Ukretnafta. Maybe.
I know, right? The ownership structure of Ukretnafta includes the Ukrainian state through Naftogaz of Ukraine, NJSC, holding about 43% of shares. The
Wow.
private group, controlled by Ukrainian businessmen Ihor Kolomovsky and Oleg Kanzdar Yarkovsky, holding about 50% via offshore entities.
Ah,
In case you forgot, Ihor Kolomovsky is a prominent Ukrainian oligarch who played a significant role in Vladimir Zelensky's rise to power during the 2019 presidential election. This support included media support. Kolomoisky owned the One Plus One media group, whose main TV channel, One Plus One, broadcast, quote, Servant of the People, the hit political satire starring Zelensky. This show helped propel Zelensky's national profile and popularity. Kolomoisky's media outlets gave extensive, supportive coverage to Zelensky throughout his campaign. Business and personal connections. Zelensky's production company, Powertal 95, had business ties with Kolomoisky's media group. During the campaign, Zelensky appointed Kolomoisky's personal lawyer as a key advisor, and he traveled to meet Kolomoisky abroad on multiple occasions while Kolomoisky was in exile. Perceptions of influence. These connections fuel perceptions, especially among critics and political opponents, that Zelensky was Kolomoisky's candidate or potential puppet of the oligarch. His campaign benefited from Kolomoisky's resource and media influence, leading to skepticism by the independence of this anti-oligarch platform. While Kolomoisky and Zelensky have since parted ways, Ihor is still a major economic force in Ukraine, and this hit him where it counts. It also damages Ukraine's lines of communication with respect to getting fuel to Ukrainian military vehicles. The bombing of Sokar in Odessa is even bigger news. Sokar is the state oil company of Azerbaijan Republic. It's Azerbaijan's national oil and gas corporation and operates fuel stations, terminals, and logistics facilities in several countries, including Ukraine. The Odessa depot serves as a gateway for fuel products destined for European markets and for Israel. The destruction of Sokar's Odessa oil depot is a significant financial blow for Azerbaijan, leading to reduced market access, increased cost burdens, and forcing a reassessment of both commercial and diplomatic strategies for Azerbaijan in Ukraine, in Israel, and in Europe. Consider this: Sokar operates around 60 fuel stations across Ukraine and has invested in oil storage and networks infrastructure in the Kyiv, Odessa, and Nikolaev regions. This is not just an attack against the leader of Azerbaijan, it also is a severe blow to Ukraine's ability to supply oil and fuel to its military forces. Putin sent a clear message to the Azeri leader Aliyev, who has been way too chummy with Zelensky, Israel, and the United States. FAFO. F
yeah.
around and find out. If you want to know what Putin's government is thinking in the wake of Monday's meeting in Washington between Trump and Zelensky, set aside 20 minutes to listen to Sergei Lavrov.
Okay, we're not going to set aside the 20 minutes because Scott Ritter is going to cover that, okay, in the video that we go after at some later time. But this prologue was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the fact that Kolomoisky got into trouble. His holdings, got into trouble, and that was damaging the lines of communication with respect to getting fuel to the Ukrainian forces. And then, of course, the other attack, okay, in Odessa, Azerbaijan, very, very, very important. Okay, both in taking fuel away from the Ukraine, but also because Azerbaijan was putting pressure, on the Armenians, to conclude the deal they just made with the United States for a peace and prosperity corridor that would be leased to the United States for 99 years. They were planning on calling it the Trump corridor, but okay, I don't know if that's going to happen. Okay, let's go on to the second of the Larry Johnson blogs that we're going to cover. Would you like to read that as well, Dee?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So let me share it. Share screen.
Yeah, hello, Steve Wolfbrand. He's here at 9:05, Steve.
Hello, Steve. Oh, the next one is Trump's gambit to weaken BRICS.
Yeah, turned in his face.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Here we are, Sonar 21. Donald J. Trump's gambit to weaken BRICS backfires. Is he still trying to woo Russia in a bid to defeat China? 20 August 2025, Larry Johnson. And it has here press release on Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's upcoming talks with Foreign Minister of India, Subramanian Jaishankar.
Yeah, I think it's Jay Shankar. Subramaniam Jay Shankar.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to read that small print there?
Yeah, sure. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Okay.
On August 21st, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold talks with Minister of External Affairs of the Republic of India, Subramanian Jaishankar, in Moscow. Russia and India have developed a special privileged strategic partnership based on mutual trust and respect. The core spheres of cooperation between the two countries include efforts to step up political dialogue in both bilateral and multilateral fragments, as well as ensuring that agencies in charge of economic and financial matters, energy, arms, manufacturing, science, and culture work more closely together. Russia and India's foreign ministers will pay special attention to the current and future avenues for promoting bilateral cooperation. They will also discuss the schedule for future contacts. The meeting's agenda will focus on facilities, the emergence of transport, logistics, banking, and financial links, and change that would be immune to any adverse pressures from unfriendly countries, while also increasing the use of national currencies in their mutual settlements. Expanding cooperation in transport, energy, agriculture, science, and technology will also be on the meeting's agenda. The ministers will also coordinate their positions on the latest international developments, paying special attention to interactions within the United States, BRICS, the SCO, and the Group of 20. The substantive exchange of opinions between the two officials will also include topics related to shaping a security architecture with greater justice for all in the Asia-Pacific region, as well as the situation in Ukraine and Afghanistan. and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
So they're going to be discussing a lot,
Yes.
very
Mos-
wide-ranging.
Moscow and New Delhi view multipolarity as a core factor for maintaining balance and equilibrium within a world order shaped over the previous decades. Russia focuses on building the inclusive political and economic system and promoting a positive agenda while maintaining constructive interstate dialogue.
Yeah, then Larry says,
I posted this image of the press release announcing the upcoming meeting between the foreign ministers of Russia and India because it provides one more piece of evidence that Donald Trump's efforts to split BRICS is failing. And this is relevant to what has transpired among Washington, Russia, and the Europeans since last Friday's summit. It is true that Donald Trump succeeded in rekindling a cordial relationship with Vladimir Putin at last Friday's summit in Alaska, and it is clear that both men appear serious about keeping the lines of communication open. But questions remain about Trump's true objectives. Is Trump sincere in wanting to forge closer ties with Russia, or is he pursuing the strategy elucidated by A. Weiss Mitchell, who is buddy of Deputy Secretary of Defense Elbridge Colby in his August 2021 article in the National Interest, A Strategy for Avoiding Two-Front Wars? The heart of Mitchell's argument is that the U.S. must convince Russia that China is the real enemy, and the U.S. must secure Russia's cooperation in a U.S. campaign to contain China. This is not just some average former U.S. Foreign Service officer opining. Mitchell has sterling economic credentials and served as Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs during Trump's first term. Mitchell is currently the head of a think tank, and from the perch he was tasked by the Pentagon Office of Net Assessment with writing a longer version of this paper, which was delivered to the Pentagon in the fall of 2020. In other words, Mitchell was asked to provide the U.S. Department of Defense with a strategic vision for dealing with Russia and China. I am quoting, forgive me for the lengthy quote, the most salient portions of Mitchell's paper. The greatest risk facing the 21st century United States, short of any outright nuclear attack, is a two-front war involving its strongest military rivals, China and Russia. Given this high stakes, avoiding a two-front war with China and Russia must rank among the foremost objectives of the contemporary U.S. grand strategy. Averting such scenario should not only or primarily be a concern for the U.S. military, it is also the job of the U.S. U.S. diplomacy.
okay, just a comment here. Forgive me if I'm saying that this guy must be concluded to be a real Captain Obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, please go on.
Indeed, diplomacy in its highest form has historically been used for precisely this purpose, as an instrument for rearranging power in space and time to avoid fighting numerous enemies at once. This role, the sequencing of rivalries, should be the central preoccupation of American diplomacy today. While accomplishing this task will not be easy, COVID-19 may present an unexpected opportunity by widening the power disparity between China and Russia. The pandemic has heightened Russia's economic dependency on China as a source of capital, markets, and international political support. Paradoxically, the very fact of this deepening dependency is likely to increase Russian fear of becoming a sidecar to Beijing's ambitions and create incentives for Moscow to reorient its foreign policy. Rather than attempting to woo or court Russia into a conciliatory stance, we should present it with a combination of insuperable obstacles to westward expansion, including, if necessary, by inflicting a far more serious defeat than it has heretofore experienced in Ukraine, while presenting new opportunities for cooperation, investment, and growth in Russia's east. Simply put, the goal should be to alleviate America's simultaneity problem by giving Russia incentives to be less of a European power and more of an Asian one.
Okay, so the stupidity of this is that it looks like Russia on its own, okay, and not because of any serious defeat in Ukraine, has already decided that it wants to be more of an Asian power, than the European power.
Yeah,
It's moving to do that because it seems to Russia, to be far more profitable, to do business in Central Asia, to do business in the Far East, okay, and to develop an Arctic channel for shipping. So it's focusing on those things, and it's not focusing on expanding to the West at all.
no.
Anyway, let us go on.
The goal of our diplomacy toward Russia and the crux of our strategy for avoiding a two-front war, should be to sharpen Russia's dilemma and ensure that, as its fear of China ripens, it has viable options for a foreign policy other than aggression toward the West. Such an approach would not operate on the premise that the United States can court or woo Russia into a conciliatory stance. To the contrary, its premise would be that to the extent that any reduction in tension with Russia is still possible, it will be because Russia's leaders decide on the basis of a cold-blooded read of their own interests that détente with the West meets Russia's security needs better than their present aggressive policies do.
Okay, so I think, Captain Obvious is in luck here because Russia, completely on its own, thinks that it would be good to have a détente as far as the West is concerned, okay, and to turn to Asia for its own sake.
Exactly. The United States should wish to see Russia suffer a military rebuff of sufficient magnitude to prompt its leaders to reassess their assumptions about the permissiveness of the post-Soviet space as a preferred zone of strategic expansion. America can help bring about this outcome much as it did in Afghanistan, by providing locals the means to better resist Russia at higher volumes than it has done to date, and encouraging European allies to do the same. And we should significantly raise the cost for cyber and other attacks on the United States, including via reciprocal attacks on Russian critical infrastructure and by sanctioning Putin's inner circle and the secondary market for Russian bombs. There you have it. The primary reason for the war in Ukraine, which the U.S. provoked, was to inflict a defeat on Russia that would compel it to join Team USA and help America corral China. While Mitchell is a smart guy, you can read for yourself that he's completely misjudged the consequences of trying to isolate and weaken Russia. Instead of persuading Putin to submit to Washington's hegemonic leadership and to eschew close ties with China, the opposition has happened. The opposite has happened. China and Russia and China now enjoy closer economic, diplomatic, political, and military ties than at any time in the history of both nations. I must emphasize that much of the policy-making community in Washington is still convinced that Russia and China are not natural allies, and that the West can somehow engineer a divorce between the two nations. But Washington's onerous sanctions on Russia and massive support for Ukraine in the war with Russia and its bellicose threats against China have, as I noted before, made the two fast friends and allies. You can also add India and Brazil to that list. A year ago, those two countries were not BRICS enthusiasts. Now they are. Since Trump took the oath of office in January, he has succeeded in creating a unity of purpose and desire among the BRICS nations. While Trump and his team are currently fixated on getting a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, I do not think they grasp the complexity of that task, nor do they appreciate that the real issue Russia will insist on addressing is the threat that NATO presents to Russia. Until that root cause is addressed, Russia will continue the war of attrition against Ukraine and move inexorably to the West. I discussed some of this today with Danny Davis.
So I think this blog is very strong, from the analysis standpoint. Okay, it correctly analyzed what has happened with respect to Trump putting pressure on BRICS nations,
Right.
and that having the opposite effect of what he wanted to create.
Yeah, because he had a bunch of nut jobs advising him.
A bunch of nut jobs advising him, indeed, who had no understanding of Russia, no understanding of BRICS. Okay, and then he seems to be fixated, on getting a peace agreement. But I think Larry and we agree that the Trump team doesn't grasp the complexity, of the task.
No, not at all.
I wonder whether Putin got through to him in explaining the root cause and getting Trump to recognize that it's NATO that is representing a threat to Russia. Because there's at least one thing Trump is doing now. He seems to be putting pressure on NATO to dissolve. He's creating a very difficult situation for the NATO nations, because they have to spend a lot more to rearm. They don't really have the money to do that, so they're going to create a political crisis in each of their countries. Okay, one of the ways to resolve the political crisis, is to withdraw from NATO. Simply get out of the game of continuing the war in Ukraine. And the other thing that we can do, or that they can do, as we earlier discussed, is that they can take the pressure off by getting the EU to change, or by leaving the EU and getting back the monetary sovereignty of each nation, so they can run some deficits in order both to rearm and to retain the social safety nets in each of their countries. So I thought Larry's analysis here was very, very well taken, and at the same time it was short and brief. So it had that particular advantage, as well. Let's see if we have any comments here. Steve Wolfbrand's here. He says hello. Hello, Steve. I don't think we have any other comments. So let us go on to the final blog that we're going to consider tonight by Larry. And that is NATO trying to game Russia over security guarantees for Ukraine. And Moscow says niet, which of course is no. So here are a bunch of military people who are sitting around a table. They look like they're Western military people as opposed to Russian military people. I guess they look like they're NATO military people. But Larry says, Steve Bryan, as usual, put up an excellent piece at his Substack describing a major mistake by Donald Trump regarding the issue of actually providing security guarantees to Ukraine as part of a peace deal with Russia. According to Steve, quote, the Trump administration made a massive political blunder on August 20th in its pursuit of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. The blunder centered on a virtual meeting that was led by NATO. Prior to that meeting, Trump had promised the Russians that any deal would rule out Ukraine's NATO membership. Apparently, the Russians read Trump's assurance to include no NATO peacekeepers. That was a mistake. Okay, the NATO-led meeting was intended to lay out military options to meet Ukraine's request for security guarantees. Discussion apparently considered different views on what a security guarantee would actually look like. Would it, for example, include troops, and if so, how many? Where would they be based in Ukraine, and what role would they perform? Stories are around that some countries, the British and French in one version, the British, Germans, and Poles in another, that's an unlikely option, would actually put boots on the ground inside of Ukraine. Although British sources insist that its troops would not be on the front line, but, quote, far back, quote unquote, from the action. How far back, huh? Not far enough back to escape from the Oreshnik. Anyway, going on with the quote, Russia's reaction came quickly and rejected foreign participation in security guarantees for Ukraine. Speaking about the possibility of foreign troops being deployed in Ukrainian territory, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow has always viewed this as unacceptable, quote, and I hope they understand. This would be absolutely unacceptable for Russia and for all sensible political forces in Europe, unquote, Lavrov said. Quote again, he went on to say that such proposals are a, quote, road to nowhere, unquote. Yes, he also said that they were utopian and a road to nowhere. Okay, anyway, going on with the article, Larry Johnson says, apparently, none of Trump's advisors had reviewed the proposed security guarantees that Russia presented during the Istanbul talks in March 2022 between Russia, and Ukraine. How can you not review the proposed security guarantees by the Russians in March of 2022? I mean, that is just incompetence. The Istanbul Communique, which was a draft agreement, provided a framework for a potential treaty aimed at ending the SMO of the Russians. The proposed security guarantees, as outlined in various sources, were a central component of Russia's demands, and the broader talks. Below is a detailed summary of the security guarantees that Russia proposed. Here are the key Russian proposals on security guarantees, March 2022, Istanbul Communique. 1. Ukraine's permanent neutrality and NATO exclusion. Russia insisted that Ukraine enshrine permanent neutrality in its constitution, explicitly renouncing any plans to join NATO or host foreign military forces on its territory. This was a core demand, reflecting Russia's long-standing grievance that NATO's eastward expansion threatened its security. In exchange, Russia, along with other countries, including Western powers like the United States, UK, France, and potentially China, would act as guarantor states, committing to defend Ukraine with military force if it were attacked. If it were attacked in the future. 2. Security guarantees with veto power. A critical condition proposed by Russia was that any activation of security guarantees, i.e., military assistance to Ukraine in case of attack, would require unanimous consent from all guarantor states, including Russia itself. This effectively gave Russia veto, over any intervention, rendering the guarantees, potentially ineffective from Ukraine's perspective. This provision echoed the structure of the Minsk II Accords, where Russia was treated as a neutral party rather than a belligerent, allowing it to block actions against itself. 3. Limits on the military of Ukraine. Russia demanded significant restrictions on the size and capability of Ukraine's armed forces, including caps on personnel, equipment, and military exercises. The exact limits were a point of contention, with disagreements over how small the military of Ukraine could be while still maintaining defensive capacity. Ukraine would be prohibited from conducting military exercises with foreign partners in its territory, airspace, territorial waters, or exclusive economic zone without the consent of guarantor states, including Russia and China. 4. Territorial and legal concessions. Russia sought also de jure recognition of its control over Crimea and de facto recognition of Russian-held parts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kyrgyzstan. The status of Crimea was proposed to be negotiated over a 10 or 15-year consultation period, during which Ukraine would pledge not to attempt retaking it by force. Russia also demanded that Ukraine amend its constitution to make Russian an official state language on par with the Ukrainian language, and repeal decommunization laws and sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014. Further, Ukraine was to withdraw criminal cases against Russia at the ICC for war crimes. 5. The role of guarantor states. The proposed guarantors included permanent Security Council members, Russia, US, UK, France, China, potentially granting Russia and China veto power over any response to future aggression via the UNSC framework. This structure was designed to limit Western military support to Ukraine in future conflicts. This was Russia's demand in 2022, Larry says, and I doubt that they have I doubt they have reversed themselves. If Donald Trump and his team want to secure a peace agreement to end the SMO, then they should take the time to fully immerse themselves in the Russian position and not waste time in entertaining the possibility of NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Russia will not allow that. And Larry ends by pointing out, Garland Nixon and I had our weekly chat on Thursday afternoon. I'm also posting my Wednesday conversation, with Andy Millett. And there's the photo of the video with Garland Nixon, and another photo of the video of Larry Johnson, with Andy Millett. And that ends that particular blog. That was also very, very well taken in terms of advice for the West and the advisors to Donald Trump. Don't waste anybody's time thinking that the Russians are going to allow any NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Of course, that's the last thing that they're going to agree to. So don't even propose it. It's just a waste of time. Okay, let's check out your comments on this point. We still have no comments. We have risen in attendance to 17 people. That's both from Twitter and from YouTube. So attendance is very low tonight. So let's go on to share the screen.
Okay, I'll try to share some more. I just want to let you know too that RT is has a channel in India. If you go on to X, it's RT_India.
RT_India. Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, a lot of good news.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, our next video is called World in Shock. It's another short video. Armenia and Iran sign a strong agreement. Yerevan, that's the capital of Armenia, gives Iran access to Europe, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I am now sharing the video. And I'll roll it back to the beginning and play it.
Against the backdrop of a rapidly changing geopolitical situation in the South Caucasus region, Armenia and Iran are betting on deepening cooperation, which is increasingly acquiring a strategic dimension. The official visit of the President of the Islamic Republic Masoud Pezeshkian to Yerevan was a clear confirmation that bilateral relations are reaching a new level, both in the economic sphere and in the field of infrastructure, energy, and politics. At a joint press conference with the President of Iran, Prime Minister of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan recalled that the countries have set themselves an ambitious goal to increase the volume
Honey and cinnamon might be the secret to naturally preventing Alzheimer's and early dementia. I'm 72 years old.
of bilateral trade, first to $1 billion and then to $3 billion. According to him, the first stage has almost been achieved, and the free trade agreement between Iran and the Eurasian Economic Union, which has entered into force, creates unique opportunities for expanding trade. This goal has not only economic, but also symbolic significance. We are talking about creating a sustainable economic bridge that will allow Yerevan and Tehran to minimize the risks of external pressure, as well as diversify their foreign economic ties. However, bilateral relations are not limited to trade. There's a whole range of infrastructure projects on the agenda that can change the balance of power in the region in the long term. Thus, Armenia and Iran have agreed to build a second bridge across the Ara River in the Nordaz region, which will become a key transport artery. At the same time, the existing bridge is being reconstructed and border terminals are being improved. These measures should not only increase the volume of transit, but also make it more predictable and safe. In parallel, the project to build the Kajaranagarok Road with a total length of 32 kilometers is being developed. It is being carried out by an Iranian company, which emphasizes the trusting nature of the cooperation. For Armenia, this project is of strategic importance. It provides direct access to the Iranian border, forming the basis for future transport routes. For Iran, this is a way to strengthen economic ties with Yerevan and enter transit schemes linking the Persian Gulf with the Black Sea. Energy remains an equally important area. In the near future, Armenia and Iran intend to complete the construction of the third power transmission line, which will increase the volume of electricity exports from Armenia. This project has a two-way effect. Armenia gets an opportunity to expand its export potential, and Iran gets a tool for balancing energy supplies, especially given the growing domestic demand. Pashinyan emphasized that both sides agreed to accelerate the implementation of this project, since its completion is of key importance for energy security. The package of documents signed in Yerevan covers a wide range of areas. In addition to traditional trade and economic agreements, the parties agreed to cooperate in the fields of standardization, accreditation and metrology, tourism, education and professional training, medicine, urban development, archival affairs and museum exchange. It is noteworthy that Iranian specialists will be involved in a large-scale social program for the construction of 300 schools and 500 kindergartens in Armenia. This not only promotes infrastructure development, but also indicates that Tehran is interested in a long-term and institutional presence in Armenia. A special place is occupied by the Persian Gulf Black Sea Transport Corridor project. It is considered one of the most strategically significant for both countries. In Iran, the railway has already reached Jolfa, and the Jolfa-Yerevan section has received official approval. This route is capable of providing direct communication between Iran and Europe via Armenia, turning it into a key transit hub. Moreover, Yerevan will gain access to Iranian ports on the coast of the Persian Gulf and the Oman Sea, which will open up the possibility of access to global trade routes. In essence, this project forms an alternative to the Zangezur corridor promoted by Azerbaijan and Turkey, and opens up a real chance for Armenia to compensate for the lack of its own access to the sea. The political context of the visit turned out to be no less significant than the economic one. President Pezeshkian clearly stated that Iran has never recognized and will not recognize the violation of Armenia's territorial integrity. This statement sounded especially weighty against the backdrop of the discussion on the future of regional communications and the efforts of external players seeking to gain a foothold in the South Caucasus. Iran has essentially confirmed that it views Armenia as a key partner and ally whose borders are inviolable.
Drop your kitchen scraps in here instead of here, and you'll never have to deal with nasty trash. Plus, it keeps food out of landfill.
Moreover, Pezeshkian emphasized that peace in the Caucasus is a strategic priority for Iran, and transferring the settlement to external forces will only worsen the situation. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi noted that Armenia has given clear guarantees that its territory will never be used for actions against Iran. This is especially important in conditions where the region has become an arena for competition between global centers of power, and the presence of third parties at the Armenian-Iranian border is perceived by Tagarans as a direct threat. Thus, Armenia is not just a neighbor for Iran, but a guarantor of stability and a partner with whom it is possible to coordinate actions in sensitive security areas. Iranian Minister of Industry and Trade Mohammad Atabak added that Armenia is a gateway for Iran to the O, and the preferential trade agreement that has entered into force has reduced duties on 87% of goods to zero, which has already accelerated trade turnover. He reported that during the last meeting with the Armenian Minister of Economy, it was decided to create a working group to eliminate the remaining barriers and develop uniform trade standards. This suggests that both countries are striving for practical steps. They are limited to declarations. On the sidelines of the visit, an Armenian-Iranian business forum was held in Yerevan, which brought together representatives of the business circles of both countries. Its goal is to deepen trade and economic ties, stimulate investment, implement joint projects, and expand the exchange of technological experience. It should be noted that a meeting was also held between Armenian President Vahan Kachaturian and Masoud Pezeshkian, during which the parties once again emphasized the importance of deepening friendship and cooperation. Thus, the visit of the Iranian president to Armenia was not just a protocol event, but a critical stage in the development of a new format of bilateral cooperation. Armenia and Iran are actually forming their own contour of regional stability, based on infrastructure and energy projects, political support, and a common interest in strengthening independence from external centers of power. For Yerevan, this is a chance to consolidate its role as a transit hub and compensate for its geopolitical vulnerability. For Tehran, it is an opportunity to enter new markets and increase its influence in the South Caucasus. In a situation where the region is becoming an arena for competition between world powers, the alliance between Armenia and Iran is acquiring significance that goes far beyond bilateral relations and influences the formation of the future architecture of security and cooperation in Eurasia. Leave your opinion in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel to be the first to know the most important and latest news from the world.
Okay, so that video was very clear that there has been an agreement signed and sealed, okay, and also delivered between the Armenians, and the country of Iran. So, where does the agreement between the Armenians and the United States for control of the Zangezur corridor now stand? Last week, we heard the news that Trump had signed an agreement, with the Iranians to lease a strip of that corridor very near the border of Iran for 99 years. That was going to be the Trump corridor for peace and prosperity, or something like that, anyway. Okay. But the signature on that corridor did not finalize the agreement between the two nations. the finalization of that agreement was dependent on the legislature inside of Armenia. And they hadn't spoken on the subject yet. So there's at least the possibility here that with the agreement, the very comprehensive agreement that Armenia and Iran have now concluded, that the Trump agreement will never be finalized by the legislature. If it is finalized, it will really make things very difficult because Iran has agreed to guarantee the territorial integrity of Armenia, okay, to protect it. And yet, seems to me this lease to the United States is potentially a violation of the territorial integrity of Armenia, and is also a threat to the Iranians. So it runs completely counter to the Iranian agreement, Armenia just made. So it remains to be seen whether the Trump agreement is going to be finalized or not. My guess is that it won't be, because it's been preempted by this new agreement between the Iranians and the Armenians. I think the Armenians are also better off to trust Iran, simply because Iran is local to them and very powerful, inside the region, and allied with Russia, which is also likely to be a guarantor of the territorial integrity, of Armenia as well. So I don't expect to see the Trump agreement be finalized. So we still have only one comment. So let us get on to the next piece, which is a piece from Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Farris. Would you like to take that one, Dee?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so I will share that one for you now.
The U.S. can end the Gaza genocide now. Jeffrey G. Sachs and Sybil Farris, August 21st, 2025. Stop funding genocide. President Donald J. Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize and its efforts toward peace in Ukraine, if successful, could possibly help him earn one, but only if he also ends U.S. complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Under Trump, as under former President Joe Biden, the U.S. has served as Israel's partner in mass murder, annexation, starvation, and the escalating torment of millions of Palestinians. The genocide can and will stop if Trump wills it. So far, he has not. Israel is committing genocide. Everyone knows it, even its staunchest defenders. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem has recently made a poignant acknowledgement of, quote, our genocide. In Foreign Affairs, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Jack Lew recently admitted that extremist parties in Netanyahu's government openly aim to starve Palestinians in Gaza. Lew frames his piece as praise for the former Biden administration and for himself for their supposedly valiant efforts to prevent mass starvation by pressuring Israel to allow minimal food entry, while blaming Trump for easing that pressure. Yet the actual importance of the piece is that an ardent Zionist insider certifies the genocidal agenda sustaining Netanyahu's rule. Lew recounts that in the aftermath of October 7th, Israelis frequently pledged that, quote, not a drop of water, not a drop of milk, and not a drop of fuel will go from Israel to Gaza, end quote. A stance that still shapes Israel's cabinet policy. The International Court of Justice can use Lew's article as confirmation of Israel's genocidal intent.
Yes, it can. And at this juncture, it might be good to mention that where is the finding of the ICJ concerning the genocide? It's taking so long to come. I mean, there's a question about whether it will come before the genocide is completed. And
Right,
what is that?
and it's all these sanctions and all this nonsense that the U.S. is trying to prevent um, the ICJ from acting. But you know something, they need to act.
They need to
Uh,
have.
right, and you know the UN should also, with the Security Council, do something where the U.S. is concerned. The U.S. is complicit in all this, and they shouldn't have any power to veto what's going on.
But they do have the power to veto. And so action has to be taken by the General Assembly and not
Yes.
by the Security Council because until the rules of the UN are changed, if there's a veto, the Security Council is not able to take any action. Okay, so it's I think in the UN it's really up to the General Assembly.
Right.
As far as the ICJ is concerned, if they don't soon come out with a finding of genocide, I think their credibility will be lost forever.
All right. And they're losing the international community, international rule, international law is losing credibility.
It is losing credibility because they won't come out with a decision. They have to come out with a decision, and the nations of the world have to support that decision with concrete action.
Exactly.
If they care about the viability of international law.
The genocide in Gaza, coupled with the annexation in the West Bank, aims to fulfill the Likud vision of a greater Israel that exercises territorial control between the sea and Jordan. This will destroy any possibility of a Palestinian state and any possibility of peace. Indeed, Bezalel Smotrich, the extremist minister of finance and minister in the Ministry of Defense, recently vowed to, quote, permanently bury the idea of a Palestinian state, end quote, while the Knesset has recently called for annexation of the occupied West Bank. But you know, that's all illegal under international law.
It is all illegal under international law. It's illegal and it's outrageous.
Now, the international community could tell them all just to get the hell out of the West Bank, but
They,
nobody will do it.
nobody will do it. Of course, there have been efforts of late or talk, okay, of a possible alliance of Turkey, uh, Iran, okay, and I forget the third country, to come together to actually use some armed force to get the Israelis out of there. But that has not come to fruition yet. It seems to be at the stage of, speculation right now. The three countries involved, do not involve Egypt. But today I saw a headline that there was a strike by Egypt on Israeli forces in, Gaza, an airstrike. If so, that is new, and that is a hopeful event, because if the Iranians and the Turks and the Egyptians were to unite, that combination is certainly powerful enough to drive the Israelis out of the West Bank,
Mhm.
and to drive them out of Gaza as well, to compel obedience. The populations of those three countries amount to something like 290 million people. And their resources, of course, and their military might are considerable. Please go on, Dee.
The U.S. aids and protects Israel every day in these horrific crimes against the Palestinian people. The U.S. provides billions of dollars in military support, goes to war alongside Israel, and offers diplomatic cover for Israel's crimes against humanity. The vicious mantra that, quote, Israel has the right to defend itself is the U.S. pat excuse for Israel's mass murder and starvation of innocent civilians. Generations of historians, psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, and inquiring minds will ask how the descendants and co-religionists of the Jews murdered by Hitler's genocidal regime came to become genocidaires. Two factors deeply intertwined come to that fore.
Okay, and we ought to mention here that the authors of this post, are co-religionists of the Jews. Okay, please go on.
First, the Nazi Holocaust lent credence among Jews to the Zionist claim that only a state with overwhelming military power and ready to use it can protect the Jewish people. For these militarists, every Arab country opposed to Israel's ongoing occupation of Palestine became a dire foe to be crushed by war. This is Netanyahu's doctrine of violence, which was first unveiled in the clean break strategy and which has produced non-stop Israeli mobilization and war. A society now gripped by implacable hatred, even innocent women and children in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. Netanyahu has dragged the U.S. into countless devastating and futile wars out of Netanyahu's blindness to the reality that only diplomacy, not war, can achieve Israel's security. Second, this non-stop resort to violence reignited a dormant strain of biblical Judaism, notably based on the book of Joshua, which presents God's covenant with Abraham as justification for genocides committed in conquering the Promised Land. Ancient zealotry of this kind and the belief that God would redeem his chosen people through violence fueled suicidal revolts against the Roman Empire between 66 and 135 AD.
Yes, one in 66 AD and one in 135 AD.
Mhm. Whether the genocides in the book of Joshua ever occurred, probably not, is beside the point. For today's zealots, the license to commit genocide is vivid, immediate, and biblically ordained. Aware of the danger of self-destructive zealotry, the rabbis who shaped the Babylonian Talmud proscribed Jews from attempting to return en masse to the Promised Land, Ketubot 111a. They taught that Jews should live in their own communities and fulfill God's commandments where they are, rather than seeking to recapture a land from which they had been exiled following decades of suicidal revolt. Whatever the fundamental reason for Israel's murderous turn, Israel's survival among nations is at a risk today, as it has become a pariah state. For the first time in history, Israel's Western allies have repudiated Israel's violent ways. France, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada have each pledged to formally recognize the state of Palestine at the upcoming UN General Assembly in September. These countries will finally join the will of the overwhelming global majority in recognizing that a two-state solution enshrined in international law is the true guarantor of peace. The majority of the American people are rightly revulsed by Israel's brutality and also turning their support massively to the Palestinian cause. In a new Reuters poll released today, 58% of Americans now believe that the UN should recognize the state of Palestine, against just 32% who oppose it. American politicians will surely note the change at Israel's peril unless the two-state solution is rapidly implemented. Local arguments can also be given for a peaceful one-state binational solution, but this alternative has essentially no backing among UN member states and no basis in the international laws regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict that has been developed over more than 7 decades. This Israeli government will not change course on its own. Only the Trump administration can end the genocide through a comprehensive settlement agreement agreed by the world's nations at the UN Security Council and UN General Assembly. The solution is to stop the genocide, make peace, and salvage Israel's standing in the world by creating a Palestinian state alongside Israel on the June 4, 1967 borders. For decades, the entire Arab and Islamic world has supported the two-state solution and advocated to normalize relations with Israel and guarantee security for the entire region. This solution is in full accordance with international law and was again espoused clearly by the UN General Assembly in the New York Declaration last month at the conclusion of the United Nations high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution, July 29, 2025. Trump has come to understand that to save Ukraine, he must force it to see reality. That NATO cannot expand to Ukraine, as that would directly threaten Russia's own security. In the same way, Trump must force Israel to see reality that Israel cannot continue to rule over the Palestinian people, murder them, starve them, and ethnically cleanse them. The two-state solution thereby saves both Palestine and Israel. An immediate UN Security Council vote to grant Palestine permanent membership in the UN next month would put an end to Israel's zealous delusions of permanent control over Palestine, as well as its reckless territorial ambitions in Lebanon and Syria. The focus of the crisis would then shift to immediate and practical issues: how to disarm non-state actors within the framework of the new state and regional peace, how to enable mutual security for Israel and Palestine, how to empower the Palestinians to govern effectively, how to finance the reconstruction, and how to provide urgent humanitarian assistance to a starving population. Trump can make this happen at the UN in September. The US, and only the US, has vetoed the permanent membership of Palestine in the UN. The other members of the UN Security Council have already signaled their support. Peace in the Middle East is possible now, and there is no time to lose. Well, the problem has always been the US.
The problem has always been the U.S., but also Jeffrey Sachs has been constant in advocating for a solution that involves two states. And he has done so because of international law and the recognition of that as the solution to the problem. He has been constant over that. Okay. The problem with that is that while the member states of the UN recognize that and are for that, and while a lot of the world has support for that, there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for that among the Arab population of the Middle East, as opposed to the nations themselves. And there doesn't seem support for that, among the Israeli population, who is extremely right-wing and aggressive, at this point, and can only see the possibility of one state, between the river and the sea. Okay, so, in looking at this proposal of Jeffrey's, we have to recognize the reality that it's going to run into a lot of opposition on the ground in Israel and Palestine. And so it's going to have to be a solution which is imposed by the international community on the people of the territory. And so that has to be recognized. I'm still in favor of it because I think it will stop the fighting, and the people who live there are going to eventually come around as the economic ties change in that particular situation. But it's certainly going to be a tall order to get the two sides to live so closely together and to collaborate to create a lasting peace. I mean, that is going to be tough, and we ought not to forget that it's going to be tough, and it's going to take very, very firm and unremitting efforts to, make it a reality. I mean, it's not just going to be a one-off thing, some declaration of the UN or something like that that's going to bring the two sides up together. There are going to have to be peacekeepers, and there are going to have to be programs to bring the two sides together and to get them to collaborate for the good of everybody who lives in that area. This is going to have to be a comprehensive effort, and the international community is going to have to support it financially, and politically for a very long time for it to be successful. So, we still have some videos to cover tonight.
Okay.
3 very good videos. Do we have any more comments? No, we don't have any more comments. We have some more folks here. We are increasing in attendance. That's good to see. Let's get to the first of the videos. Okay, this video, doesn't cover the part we will play is not the whole of the video. We're coming in at about 38:40. Okay, the video goes until 52:45. So it's roughly 14 minutes of the video, okay, that we're going to play. And that 14 minutes is on the existential crisis of NATO. Larry Wilkerson is talking, to Professor Deason, Glenn Deason, and explaining why there is an existential crisis inside, of NATO. So, I'm going to bring this up to full screen and begin to play it, okay, at this point. And we will comment on it as we go through it. But it's really very, very striking.
I want to ask you about what do you feel about the European cohesion? Are they as together as they would like to communicate? Because I'm not sure if it's just strange body language, but I saw Meloni like rolling her eyes a few times during these meetings. Also, Poland was absent. I thought this was
Yes.
Why would you bring the Finns but not Poland?
Not bring the Poles. Yeah.
I thought this was a very strange.
I'm hearing from some very reliable sources inside Poland, and
Okay, what they were talking about there, of course, was the meeting that Trump held
Okay.
with the 7 nations, at the White House. And what they're talking about, okay, is the absence of Poland, from that particular meeting. Finland, being at the meeting instead, and Giorgia Meloni of Italy, who was at the meeting, rolling her eyes periodically at what was going on. She was. She was good.
Yeah.
Polish people in the United States that Zurowski is a different leader, and that he's got to be very careful about how fast he moves. He's got to be very careful about who he makes enemies right off the bat, because the existing structure of the government in Warsaw is very much in line with what you just said, very hardcore with regard to Moscow. But this guy has a brain, and he's using that brain, and he's going to walk slowly and carefully, but he's got a different view of things with regard to Moscow, wants a modus vivendi, and as a consequence, they didn't come. He made one small victory right away. They didn't come. I think that's great, because you got those countries that are abutting Ukraine that are as important as anyone when it comes to settling this and making sure it works. Because you damn sure don't want to have a rump state. It won't be a rump state. It'll still be a quite considerable state of Ukraine with a headquarters in Kyiv or whatever, with a whole bunch of people behind it who are coveting what it is in its weakened state, or maybe even wanting to do more with regard to the status of Ukraine from the eastern side than was being done from the western. You don't want that happening. And that is the answer to your question, I think, about the future of Europe. And it's a sad commentary that I make. NATO is gone, I think. It just remains to be put on the grave heap. These leaders are gone within 12 to 18, 24 months. Friedrich Merz, I think, might be the very first one to go once the Germans figure out how to deal with that incredibly stupid democratic structure they have for conducting elections. Macron is a dead man walking. Starmer's a dead man walking. I think Mark Rutte has sold his soul to NATO, and when NATO goes, his soul will go with it. I think this will all look very different in 18 to 24 months, and it's not going to feature NATO as a prominent feature. I just hope that the transatlantic link doesn't go with it. We do not need to sever our relationships for Europe. We do need to come home, basically. We are probably going to fight to keep Ramstein as long as possible and to keep it fully fleshed out with troops and CIA, Mossad, and MI6. That's their principal operating headquarters. That's where we.
I think that would not be very fortunate, because if you give them a base to operate out of, they will cause mischief, and lots of mischief.
We conducted all the operations in 2003 and 2004 and on against Ukraine, with even 3-star generals going down there to deal with the Azov battalion, for example. Very early on in this conflict, we were prepping the battleground, so to speak. All that's got to shut down. All of it's got to shut down, and then Europe's got to grow up. It has two choices about growing up. It can revert to its past and wrangle and dangle and fight with itself all over the place and not be very powerful and be subject to other people's covetousness, maybe, including maybe even Moscow. Or it can grow up and create a European security identity, its own security apparatus, and come together, not in the way the EU's come together. I think they need to get rid of the EU or revolutionize it completely. It's an autocratic, non-democratic institution. It needs to be different. If it's going to be a federal system, it needs to be a federal system, but then you need a whole lot of changes, and you need a lot of buy-in by places like Paris.
Needs to be different, especially from the economic point of view. It needs to be a monetary sovereign and to act like it. Okay, if not, it won't be able to respond to business cycles, and it will never be popular with the population, of Europe.
Berlin, London, such. And London's already voted out anyway.
When your kid is hurting and there's nothing you can do about it.
I think it's a very complicated future for Europe. Very complicated future, unless they get their act together in a significant way and divorce themselves essentially from this utter, total, hegemonic, the other way around, relationship with America. And I thought Trump wanted to do that. I thought that's what his America First MAGA movement was all about, really. And he's not shown me any credibility in that at all. And that's troublesome, because we need to come home from Europe. We need to be out of Europe. That's a prerequisite for dealing with this shift in power and dealing with it in a sane and sober way. It's not fighting it, and it's not fighting it from the front lines, as it were, through proxies. It's coming home and figuring out how to adjust our power structure to that power structure, accommodate one another, and then together work on the climate crisis and the nuclear weapons problem. Those two problems will bite us in the rear end. They will kill us, both of them, if we don't do something about them in concert. And right now, Trump is unwinding most of that domestically.
So, of course, I have to agree completely with this vision, of Larry. The world has to come together to handle the climate crisis. In order to do that, these wars, have got to end. There has to be an international system, which is highly collaborative. We need to accept, the existence, of the multipolar world, and learn how to play nice in the sandbox with the other kids.
I hope they talked about New START in Alaska. I hope the heck they did. I hope that dominated their conversation, because Ukraine is a footnote compared to what that means in terms of global security and national security too. I mean, the two go hand in hand when you're talking nuclear weapons. If we don't get a handle on these nuclear weapons before they get completely out of control and into a really vicious new arms race, we're going to kill ourselves. It's that simple. We're going to kill ourselves. And the only way you do that is talk and deal. You don't do it with sanctions. You don't do it with military force. You do it with talking and dealing. And that's supposed to be what Trump's forte is.
You mentioned this difficult relation between the Europeans and Americans, and I very much agree. I would like to see the transatlantic connections maintained, but the Europeans have a very strange relationship with Americans. They're either hateful towards the Americans, or they can't wait to subordinate themselves fast enough.
Yeah.
And you see the same with Trump. You see the European leaders, they very openly hate Trump, but they also, ready to call him daddy and, do whatever he demands, in this country.
Daddy. Mark Rutter calling him daddy. That was so disgusting.
But definitely.
They sometimes refer to Trump as, possibly as bad as Hitler or the new Hitler. But at the same time, the same politicians, they can't wait to outsource our foreign policy by opening American military bases across the country. So there's no consistency.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if NATO is part of that problem. It would be better to have some distance in terms of not outsourcing security in this way. But that was just my last question. What you said about NATO not existing. So you see NATO as a dead man walking, and if so, how do you see, or how would you see it actually falling apart?
I think it already is before our eyes. I think it's falling apart before our eyes. I think Colonel McGregor, for example, is right when he says NATO is moribund. It's gone. It's done. It's fallen apart. And they have two choices. Well, more than two, I'm sure, but two distinct choices. They can either, as we said in 1991 and 92, to them, Colin Powell in Warsaw, actually, talking to the former Warsaw Pact generals, and then later in Paris, as I recall, Vienna and London, he talked to the NATO generals. And the message was, in essence, you need a European security identity. We'll start out with a brigade, say 3,000. And that brigade will be utterly independent of NATO. It'll have nothing to do with NATO, except should we get in a crisis and it be necessary at that moment, we can exchange equipment. Let's say you need some equipment because it's an internal European affair. Woo! Think the Balkans, for example, which they did nothing about. And you do this because it's internal to you and we'll help you, but you're divorced from NATO. You're not within NATO. And then you grow that up as you can into whatever force you want, and eventually it will replace your membership in NATO. And NATO can dissolve around you, or we can keep NATO as a political alliance, the transatlantic link and all that. There are all kinds of, esoteric visions of what might happen. And then that's the positive development. The negative development is they fall into rancor again. Think, previous European pictures where everybody covets everybody else and you're all fighting all the time and there's no ability to cross borders without a visa. And, you have to wait at the border for 3 days to get your visa or your pass. I hope that's not the future, but it could be if everybody falls out with one another and you get a typical squawking bunch of countries.
Yeah, well, I guess that's been the positive aspect, definitely, of having the United States in Europe, though, that finding this pacifier effect, keeping the Europeans from engaging in this reckless competition. I mean, just see how quickly they lost their minds in this war on Russia, how things which was unthinkable 3-4 years ago is, that they're talking openly about striking Moscow's. Did this kind of things. It's I think people overestimate how much stability there actually is in Europe. And if the United States would just leave tomorrow, you can't rule out that the French, British, Germans would necessarily all get along. I know the Poles are not always happy with the Germans, and now that the Germans want to be the leading military power in Europe, I know a few countries that wouldn't necessarily find comfort in this. So it's
Well, that's really why Powell and Baker and Bush, I think. I wasn't privy to a lot of the conversations with Bush, but I was with Powell and Baker and some of the others. That's why they thought it should go slow and the Europeans should literally grow themselves up into their own security identity and keep the cohesiveness of NATO, if you would, and keep the operational sharing and the interoperability and such. And maybe even, this was anathema to Bill Clinton, maybe even rebuild and refurbish to an extent necessary their own defense industry. So they didn't have to depend on the United States so much for frontline fighter aircraft and, tanks and things like that, which they did take on board a little bit, but still it was the United States reestablishing its economic hegemony in a certain extent by making them dependent on things like the F-35 and making sure that those programs stayed there. And of course, Clinton turned that on with a vengeance. Lockheed Martin was absolutely salivating at that meeting about the prospect of all these new countries to sell weapons to, because in many cases, the line for that system was shutting down or going into low rate production, which is very expensive. And the defense part doesn't like it either because the products are very expensive, rather than staying in full production because they had nobody to sell to. Well, all these new countries were countries to sell to. And that's another thing. You got so dependent on that. And Trump is using that now. He's using that now. The Europeans are going to do all this. We're going to give it to them. And they're going to. Yeah. Well, that's crazy. You got to have your own industry to a certain extent. You can depend on this or that from time to time, as we depend on you sometimes for something. And that's fine. That helps interoperability. It breeds interdependence and so forth. But basically, you got to be able to stand up on your own if necessary and not be so subservient to the empire. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of, in the current leadership, a lot of intent to do that.
Oh, well, when Trump's second administration began, the Europeans were all speaking in the language that this time they were going to really stand up and not be bullied. And instead, we saw taking subservience to an entirely new and level in which all dignity has just been thrown out the window. So we already went a bit over time here. So I want to thank you as always for coming on the program.
Surely. Thank you for having me.
So that discussion of the existential crisis of NATO was very important for a number of reasons. First, it directly states that the existential crisis is happening right now. Second, it points to the need for the European nations to stand on their own and be independent of the United States. And it critiques, of course, the subservience of the vassals and the kinds of actions they took at, that meeting with Trump, the recent meeting with Trump. It's important also because it gives you some of the history of how the Europeans developed their particular dependence on the United States and their attitudes of dependence and their need to build a security architecture for themselves, which they natively grow, in an organic way, so that they create an identity for themselves in the realm of security, an identity which, they don't have now. I think the third important point here, is that Larry Wilkerson, as is his habit, we have to remember he's not only a colonel who retired a long time ago, but since then he's been a professor at William and Mary, and he's very accomplished in the field of international relations as well, partly because of his experience with Colin Powell, okay, as a colonel, as also something of a diplomat, okay, but of course he added to that with all the years of teaching while consulting, okay, in Washington and cultivating his contacts in the halls of power. Of course, he's nowhere near the halls of power at this point because, as you may guess, he's anything but a Trumpist. He certainly is not
Right.
a Trumpist. Okay, but as a military man, he also sounds, very much like an opponent of war, and very much like a peacenik. And he wears that identity also when he goes out and he demonstrates and protests peace as well. He very often can be found in the streets these days, even at the tender age, okay, of 80 or so, which he is. So, let us again check your comments, see if there are any more comments. No, surprisingly, our attendance is getting bigger as we go on, but we still don't have any comments on YouTube. Okay.
Well, that's because of we're not being on Facebook. Because Evelina and there's several people that they don't use other channels; they just use Facebook.
Right. I did send a link though to Evelina
I did too.
to try to get her here, but I guess it didn't work. She decided if she couldn't have Facebook, she wasn't going to come. But anyway, okay, let's go on with our program here. Okay, the next item in our program is a video between the judge and Jeff Sachs. And the main topic of that video was to be on, Netanyahu, but they spent most of their time talking about, Ukraine and that situation, okay, and BRICS and security guarantees. And that is the part of the video that we're going to emphasize here. Let me get clear on what I'm going to play for you. Let me look at my program. Right. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning. And we're going to go to about 1705 in this video.
Want to know what keeps orthopedic surgeons in business? It starts with these warning signs.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, August 21st, 2025. As you can see, the good Professor Jeffrey Sachs is here with us. Professor Sachs, we spent a happy morning together on Saturday at the Ron Paul Institute, where I must tell you, you gave a most informative lecture that brought the house down. And then you were...
So that was about a week ago. Okay, at a hotel that was adjacent to Dulles Airport. It was the Ron Paul Institute Peace Conference. And Jeffrey Sachs did give a great speech at that particular peace conference.
Were kind enough to sit on the panel with Colonel McGregor and Anya Parampil and Max Blumenthal. And that program, together with your lecture, has been viewed by about 250,000 of our regular viewers, and I'm grateful for it. Since then, of course, we've learned a little bit more about Alaska, and we had this kabuki dance, if you will, in the White House on Monday. All right, that's background. I mainly want to talk to you about Netanyahu invading Gaza, but before we get there, the U.S. must know that Russia has legitimate sovereignty-based security concerns and would no more accept EU, UK, or US troops on the ground or in the air in Ukraine than the US would accept Russian or Chinese or North Korean troops in Mexico.
This is exactly right. All of the issue of the Ukraine war comes down to a basic reciprocity, or the golden rule. We should not do in other places what we would not have others do to us in our own neighborhood. We have had the so-called Monroe Doctrine for 202 years. The Monroe Doctrine was issued in 1823 by President Monroe, written by his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. It said to the Europeans, don't meddle in our neighborhood, and we won't meddle in yours. Very important, that second clause, very often forgotten. As the United States became its own imperial power, it was more do as we say, not as we do. In other words, don't come close to us, but we will meddle wherever we want in your neighborhood. And of course, the war in Ukraine, I say.
That, of course, is the arrogance of the United States today. That is our foreign policy. Don't come into our neighborhood, but we will meddle in your neighborhood as much as we want.
Exactly.
Because anyone who knows the background knows that it is, of course. So the narrative or propaganda of the U.S. government is the opposite. But of course, the war in Ukraine came because the U.S. was meddling right against Russia's border, meddling in a most direct security sense, which is to push NATO and U.S. missile systems into Ukraine, and not only into Ukraine, into the South Caucasus region as well. People should look at a map and look at the absurdity, worse than absurdity, the tragic arrogance of the U.S. saying that the country Georgia should also be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Well, the idea was the opposite of what we would ever tolerate in our own region. That is, the United States wanted to surround Russia in the Black Sea region, forming literally pincers of Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia to surround Russia where its Black Sea naval fleet is. It's out of a playbook from the 19th century, believe it or not. It's the playbook of the British and French empires in 1853 when they launched a war against Russia called the Crimean War. Well, all of this is to say that Russia said, no, don't do that. It said that in the 1990s. It said, really, don't do that. In 2007, President Putin said, don't you dare do that. In 2008, the United States, being the arrogant U.S. that it is, said, of course we'll do it. Who are you? You're a third-rate power. We can do whatever we want. And pushed our vassal states, otherwise known as the European countries, to support the U.S.-led expansion of NATO to Ukraine and Georgia at the 2008 Bucharest summit. As we've discussed many times, there was one little fly in the ointment, and that is the Ukrainians didn't want to be drawn into this proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. So the Ukrainians voted for a president who said, we'll be neutral. That was President Yanukovych. Well, the U.S. hates neutrality. And so the U.S. overthrew Yanukovych in February 2014, and the rah-rah, yes, we'll be part of NATO regime came in, including Zelensky to this day. Anyway, the whole upshot of it is the Russians are not tolerating, understandably, the US and Europe having military presence on their border in Ukraine. And anyone who says, and this is the mantra of the people who don't think very clearly in the US, oh, Ukraine has any right to choose what it wants. It's not about Ukraine choosing. It's about if Russia invites China to have a military base in the
On August 22nd, I told viewers that the road to artificial general intelligence was already bringing massive changes to
in Mexico. If Mexico chooses that, are these people going to say, yeah, that's Mexico's choice? We're fine with the Chinese military base in Mexico on our border. Of course, the United States would not tolerate that. So this is the point. And this is clear. It's understood by everyone that has looked closely at this. It was understood by U.S. diplomats going back to the 1990s who told the CIA and the politicians, stop, this is crazy. You're going to get us into deep trouble. George Kennan, who was the greatest Russia expert of the age, a great statesman, said in 1997, this is the biggest conceivable blunder that we're making to expand NATO. This is going to ruin everything. What should be peace is going to be turned into a new confrontation. Bill Perry, who was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense, said to Clinton, you'll ruin everything. And Perry thought about resigning in protest because the decisions to expand NATO were so stupid and so reckless. Anyway, here we are, Judge, all this time later, except with 1 million Ukrainian dead because of this little U.S. adventure.
So we know that he must have said this, President Trump must have given the unmistakable impression to Prime Minister Starmer, Chancellor Merz, and President Macron that the United States would participate in militarily in security guarantees. I'm doing air quotes because nobody can really define what that means to the satisfaction of everybody else. He must have known that Putin and Lavrov would never accept EU, UK, US troops on the ground or in the air. And then the president said to Fox News the next day, well, I didn't mean boots on the ground. I meant boots in the air. He didn't say boots in the air, but reference to American pilots in the air. They're not going to accept that. Doesn't Donald Trump know that? Or is he telling the kabuki dancers who visited him in the Oval Office, who he treated like children, another story for another time, what he thinks they want to hear?
Everything is deliberately vague, opaque, smiles. This is why the war didn't end in 24 hours as Trump said that it would, because if there were clarity and honesty, the war could have ended in 24 hours. The President of the United States should say clearly, NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine. There will not be NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Ukraine's security is not going to come through NATO. It's going to come through Ukraine's neutrality, which all sides are going to respect because it's going to be very visible. And any violation of that will be understood by the whole world. And so that's where the security is going to come from. If the president knew some history or had any advisors who knew some history, they would know that the neutrality approach has actually worked repeatedly and dramatically well. The most famous example is Austria becoming neutral in 1955 with an agreement with the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union would withdraw its troops from Austria on the basis of Austria's neutrality. That happened. And the Soviet troops went home and never bothered Austria again. That's also the truth. Unfortunately, we don't have a president who speaks other than by Truth Social posts that change by the moment. Nobody explains anything. Nobody's willing to say clearly almost anything. Everything has ambiguity to it deliberately. They think this is somehow clever. All it means is the war goes on and on and on. And one of the reasons is that the United States was playing a game. Of course, Ukraine in NATO is not core to U.S. security. So what was the U.S. doing pushing this? It was pushing NATO enlargement as a game to weaken Russia.
Right.
Brzezinski spelled it out. People have to read. But of course, the whole public narrative of the U.S. government is to keep people away from basic facts. But the whole game that the U.S. would play was spelled out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997. And the game was to weaken Russia. And it was a game because it's not core to U.S. security. In fact, it's created U.S. insecurity by bringing the United States into war with Russia. Now, Trump's...
And bringing us, we must add, bringing us much closer to nuclear war than we have been for 40 years, since the middle of the 1980s. That was the accomplishment of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, then the Biden administration, and now the second administration, of Donald Trump. We can't forget that the first Trump administration was instrumental in the rearming of Ukraine and making them a threat to Russia.
Somehow, gets this, or people around him kind of get this, but nobody explains it clearly. Nobody. And so everything is, like you say, kabuki theater of what do these words mean? Yes. And Trump, we love you, and we love you, and we love you, and everything is ambiguous. And the result is the war goes on day by day.
Before we get to Netanyahu's latest monstrosities, I want to prevail upon your other field of expertise, which is international economics. Was Vladimir Putin in Alaska, in a certain sense, there representing BRICS?
Well, in the following strange way, President Trump has united the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a number of new members, but the 5 that I mentioned are the original BRICS countries. President Trump has united them because he has gone after every one of them to a shocking extent. And in the lead up to the Alaska summit, Trump destroyed years of developing closer relations with India, destroyed it almost overnight by putting a so-called security tariff against India, 25% tariff, because India buys oil from Russia as Europe buys natural gas from Russia, as the United States buys many things from Russia, but they decided to go after India. That pushed India away from the United States. I can only tell you in shorthand the reactions in India, which I follow very, very closely, are to have united a country of 1.5 billion people to say the United States is completely untrustworthy. Completely. It united the whole country.
Wow.
You're telling me.
There's 5 feminizing foods in every man's kitchen, destroying his testosterone. Feminizing food.
Same with Brazil, by the way. He penalized Brazil. Why?
Okay, before we get into Brazil, He drove India into the arms of China, which for years had been one of the arch enemies, of India. Okay. And of course, in BRICS, the two have come together somewhat. But the tariffs, actually drove the Prime Minister of India to go to China, to have conferences with Xi, multi-day conferences, with Xi. And now he's talking about the state of, India-China relations being far better than they ever were before, with concrete plans to collaborate and concrete plans to come closer together, through BRICS. Okay, now India is closely connected both to Russia and to China. And for the moment, anyway, is clearly out of the orbit of the United States. Now, when playing balance of power games, in international politics, we always in the past had looked at the situation as well. Russia and China, are together. To have any hope of balancing power with the Russians and the Chinese, we have to have an India on our side, because the population of India now is even a little greater than the population of China. And the future potential, of India to be a great power. I mean, India is a great power now, but certainly in the coming years, both they and the Chinese are probably going to be the two great powers of the world. And we have driven that power into the BRICS bloc further and further, or Donald Trump has anyway. And we have then lost our potential partner in the game of balance of, power politics. Maybe that will turn out actually to be better for the world. But from the viewpoint of the national interest of the United States, it is idiocy. And it's just something. I mean, when you look at the various things that Trump has done, the silliness of those things is brought home to you. The alienation of Canada, the alienation of Mexico, the alienation, of India, the laying big tariffs on Japan. The Greenland idiocy. God. So incredible.
Because there is a court case in Brazil against the previous president, Bolsonaro. And President Trump said, I'm going to punish Brazil because of a court case in Brazil. Well, President Lula, the duly elected president of Brazil, said, excuse me, we don't need an emperor. We have an independent judiciary. So Trump has put on tariffs against Brazil. And basically what he did was say to all of these large countries, the US is your enemy. And we are untrustworthy because we will punish you as we want. And then the big guns of the administration, Peter Navarro, the advisor to the president, and Secretary of Treasury Besant, have gone on a campaign of insulting India every day. It's shockingly stupid, unbelievable. From America's point of view, what do they think they are doing? Well, what they're doing is there has been a flurry of diplomacy of Brazil, Russia, India, China, meeting each other nonstop in phone calls, visits by foreign ministers, visits by heads of state, calls of heads of state, meetings coming up of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping coming up in just a few days. Okay, fine. This is American foreign policy. You couldn't make this up. How inept this is, by the way. It's unbelievable.
That's it. It's unbelievable. Okay, it's inept. It's absolutely stupid. When you add that to the alienation of Mexico, okay, and Canada, our two closest allies, right on our borders, guarding our friendliness to them, guards our borders, secures the borders, from foreign threats. Okay, and so what do you have as a result of the hostile actions taken by the United States towards Canada and towards Mexico? You have both nations turning to China, making economic deals, okay, with China. Economic deals worth in billions of dollars to forge very close ties with China. When you put together all we're doing with the BRICS nations, and then you put that together with Canada, and with Mexico, what it amounts to is isolation of the United States. Then you add what we're doing to the Europeans. I don't think the Europeans are going to sit there forever as vassals of the United States. New governments are going to come into power, and they're going to resent the way the United States has been treating Europe, and they're going to turn away from the United States too. And we're going to be completely isolated. We won't have any strong allies anymore. We won't have any friends. I know. Everybody says you never have friends, okay, in international relations. It's every nation for himself. And there is a sense in which this is true. But when your foreign policy is united with the foreign policies, okay, of other nations for 40, 50, 70 years, those foreign nations are friends. And when you turn on them, they look at what you're doing as a betrayal. And that is the way the Canadians and the Mexicans are looking at the United States right now, as a nation that has betrayed them. And the Europeans are going to look at us that way too. Because under Trump, because of the way Trump looks at other nations and the way he looks at the self-interest of the United States and his hierarchical view of the world, he is alienating everybody. So everybody feels betrayed, and we have no friends anymore. This is terribly destructive. And it's not something we can afford to do. It's just not something we can afford to do. And if we don't replace this foreign policy with another shortly, this 4-year period of Trump's second presidency is going to create so much damage for us that it will take us a decade or two to repair that damage. You can't break these relations and then restore them overnight. And if you think the close economic cooperation that Canada and Mexico are developing with China has no chance of turning up into military cooperation at some point in the future, I think you're sadly mistaken. If the United States keeps up with the crap it's dishing out to everybody else in foreign policy, we're going to have a local military problem on our hands. And don't underestimate what's happening to Mexico right now. They're talking about adding 2 states to their federation. One is Cuba, okay, and the other is, Guatemala. You add those 2 states, and the population of Mexico is going to rise to 150 million people. And Mexico is a resource-rich country too, with a manufacturing base that is very, very impressive. And I'll tell you about. I'll mention another country that is rich in resources, and it has has a population of 150 million people. Also, that country, the country I'm thinking of, is Russia. You can tell that a nation that has a population of 150 million people, that is rich in resources, can ultimately represent quite a rival in the field, of international politics. If you look at Mexico, and also Brazil, then they become quite a counterweight to the United States in our hemisphere for the first time. You add the populations of Mexico and Brazil together, and you get a population comparable to our population, with resources comparable to ours, and with great potential, as well. And then you get a major rival in our hemisphere to the United States. That's where our foreign policy is taking us, while at the same time it alienates the rest of the world as well. We are heading towards a fatal kind, of isolation if we don't find some way of getting out from under this president and his administration. Anyway, that's the Jeffrey Sachs video. Let's look and see how we're doing. We still don't have any more comments. Dee, do you have anything to add at this point?
No.
So let us go on to the final piece of the evening, and that is batting cleanup now. Scott Ritter.
Oh, good.
And the judge. I'm going to play a part of that video too. We'll start at 9:47 in and go to about 26:40. There we are.
And John Ratcliffe, head of the CIA, all of whom were with the president of Alaska, should have been humiliated for the lousy job of preparing him and for feeding him with data and information demonstrably false.
I agree. I agree 100%. But we see the reflection now in what Trump is doing. First of all, the 180-degree flop. Trump made a bold commitment, as you said, on the airplane. If Putin doesn't immediately yield to my demand for a ceasefire, there will be consequences. This will not be pretty. And suddenly he's saying, no ceasefire. We're going, long-term conflict resolution, root causes, the whole thing. And I think you're going to see as this goes forward. Look at Trump, the way he handled the Magnificent Seven that showed up in the White House, dismissive, because he now knows the Russian truth. He knows the Russian reality. And it
All right,
doesn't
well,
conform
I
with-
have to ask you about the Magnificent Seven. It is clear from whatever he said to them, perhaps privately, because Chancellor Scholz said this back in Germany, and President Macron said it that evening on NBC News, that the United States would participate militarily in a security guarantee. So there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, what is a security guarantee? And secondly, I can't imagine any circumstances under which the Russians would agree to EU, UK, US troops anywhere in post-war Ukraine, whether on the ground or in the air.
Lavrov just said that. I mean, you've met Lavrov. You know he's a serious man. Lavrov just said, no, this is not going to happen. No European presence at all. No security guarantees the way they're talking about. Russia is the security guarantee. He said, if you want to do all that, Russia gets a veto over it. Because the Russians are putting a mark down. Ukraine belongs to us. Ukraine
So
is part of it.
why would Trump have, unless he's just wanting to, he sometimes listens to whoever speaks in his ear last. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's Lindsey Graham. Sometimes he's the opposite to that. Sometimes he tells the audience what he thinks they want to hear. Why would he even have said what Macron said and Merz said he said?
Because first of all, I think Macron and Merz are guilty of wishful thinking. First of all, Trump goes into verbal diarrhea. I apologize, but that's just the way he does. He starts talking about something. You have to listen to what he says very carefully. He says, security.
One night, after staying back late at his clinic doing admin, Dr. Tom was buried alive.
Security guarantees. We think it's a good idea. Then he said about the Europeans, they want to do this, but I don't know if it's going to happen. That's the reality. Trump didn't commit to anything. I can guarantee you 100% Trump did not commit to putting U.S. air power over Ukraine, and I can guarantee 100% he did not commit to putting U.S. boots on the ground. What he told the Europeans is, this is your responsibility. You have to do it. We'll be sort of there in the background monitoring this, but no, Trump did not commit American military power to Europe. This is wishful thinking on the part of the Europeans who heard what they wanted to hear and eliminated the parts of Trump's response, such as the one that I just said, that make it clear that he didn't agree to this.
All right. Sergei Lavrov has made a number of newsworthy statements in the past 4 days. I mean, the first newsworthy statement he made was his sartorial choice when he arrived in Alaska wearing a CCCP sweatshirt. That was enough to get the attention of the international press and in a brilliant way. We'll put that aside because you and I both love that kind of snarkiness. Here is Foreign Minister Lavrov. Chris, I'm not sure when this was, but I know it was very recently. It was either yesterday or this morning. No strategic guarantees. Cut number 18.
Following the summit of Russia and the United States in Alaska, where we have achieved significant progress in moving towards defining the future shape and parameters for conflict settlement. And following this event, the European countries, together with Mr. Zelensky, went to Washington, and there they tried to promote their own agenda, which is aimed at making sure that the security guarantees follow the logic of isolating Russia, the logic of uniting the Western world and Ukraine in order to continue the aggressive confrontational policy of holding Russia back, and in mind of the goal of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. We completely reject such proposals and initiatives. Besides, the Ukrainian regime and its representatives are making quite specific comments on the current situation, directly showcasing that they are not interested in a sustainable long-term and fair conflict settlement.
There you have it.
Look, the Russians said to Trump, if you can open the door for peace on our terms, we're willing to walk through it. But the Russians haven't even put their shoes on because they know that Zelensky and Europe won't play ball. Zelensky's already undermined himself. I mean, one of the key Russian demands is that whatever post-conflict Ukraine looks like, they need to respect the rights of the Russian people who live in Ukraine. That means that Russians have to be able to speak their language, practice their religion, the Orthodox faith, which is being violently suppressed by the Ukrainians today, and that their history and culture has to be respected. Russian literature has to be allowed in the libraries. The Ukrainians have to stop going in and toppling Russian monuments. And yet Zelensky today just straight up said they will not allow Russians to speak Russian. In game, set, match, it's over. That Zelensky just committed political suicide.
Well, how close your
Okay, just to make it clear, okay, Zelensky was saying that if he got his way and there was a peace treaty where the four provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, and Zaporizhia, Kherson, if they stayed inside, of Ukraine, then what Ukraine would do would continue the same discrimination against the Russian language and the Russian culture that caused this war in the first place. And so Zelensky, facing defeat, stupidly says the same thing and adheres to that same policy that caused the intervention of Russia in the first place. Just incredible and unforgivable.
colleague Colonel Schaefer says 30 to 45 days. How close is the Russian military to achieving its military objectives on the ground?
I'm not going to dispute that time frame. I'm also not going to commit to it because one thing I've learned is that the Russians don't care about calendars; they care about results.
Right.
And that the Russians, as the Ukrainian.
But the judgment of Colonel Schaefer remains. In his judgment, this war will be over in 30 to 45 days because the Ukrainians will collapse. So not 3 months, not 4 months, about a month and a half, according to Colonel Schaefer. Now, I think Scott probably believes that also, but he's a no going to say because he knows a prediction in wartime, is a tricky business. But I think he believes it will probably be in that time frame also.
Casualty figures showed the Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians. For all the military geniuses out there who say, well, the map hasn't moved very much. Well, it doesn't need to. Demilitarization means destroying the Ukrainian army, and that's what's happening. And when they're fully destroyed, the Russians will advance as they are doing right now across the entire line of contact.
Remember the three war aims of the Russians when they first came in: demilitarization, denazification, and the neutralization, of Ukraine. Those were the three main war aims or aims of the SMO. And it looks like in getting to demilitarization, the Russians have also been getting to denazification because they're killing the Azov soldiers right and left, very effectively all through the war. But in the latest conflicts, in Sumy, they've been absolutely decimating them, where Azov was thrown into Sumy once again to try to stem the tide there. And the Russians have been slaughtering them. If this goes on, there will be no Azov people left at the end of the war. So denazification will have occurred. And neutralization of Ukraine, that's going to be a feature of the peace agreement. And if there's no peace agreement, that result will certainly be imposed on Ukraine by Moscow.
But the Russians, aren't going to be in a position where they say, "Oh my God, we said we'd have this done in 45 days, and now we have to put the pedal to the metal and lose 100,000 guys." This isn't the Battle of Berlin. Russia's winning. Russia will. Right now, they're basically setting the Ukrainians up for a disastrous winter. They're taking out the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, letting the Ukrainian people know that this idiot that you have in office right now is going to ruin you. There's no gas reserves for Ukraine. Europe doesn't have enough gas for itself. This is the Russian concept. So if it's over in 45 days, that'd be Abdi Aladinov, who's the lieutenant general commander of the Akhmat Special Forces. He thinks there's going to be significant changes. He basically said, take a snapshot of the front line today, take a snapshot in 30 days, and you won't recognize it. It'll have changed that much. But the Ukrainians have shown themselves to be very tenacious defenders. Despite the fact of their forced mobilization, they still get several thousand, primed volunteers, people ready to get trained and fight. They're just not getting trained anymore. They're being thrown to the front lines without adequate training. And the complexity of this modern battlefield is such that if you don't have training, you're not trained to survive, you die. Again, why they have 1.7 million dead. So the Russians are confident in victory.
The figure seems to vary now. The figure by Scott and Colonel McGregor seems to vary between 1.7 million, 1.8 million. Okay, sometimes they say 1.8 million, and sometimes it's 1.7 million. Either way, the losses are disastrous.
Everything they said, peace through victory, meaning that there's not going to be peace through compromise. I think Rubio's got to get that term compromise out of his mouth. The only compromise going to be made is from the United States. The Russian perspective, peace through victory. Victory will be theirs, one way or another. And this is the reality. It's over for Ukraine. Look, every aspect. The Russians are now starting to play hardball. There was an American factory. It was forget Flex, I think, Flex Industries. The Ukrainians are like, it produced coffee makers. Did you see that factory? It didn't produce coffee makers. Flextronics here in the United States, before it renamed them Flex, was a major producer of advanced electronics for American defense and aerospace technologies. That's what they were doing in Ukraine. This was the place to produce the electronics for the Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been erased off the map by the Russians. We're starting to play hardball. There's an American.
So Trump was complaining about that the other day. He was saying, "Oh, they've done something unforgivable. They have destroyed an American company." Well, if it's an American company is in Ukraine contributing to the war effort, they have no right to be there. If they get hit by the Russians, too bad for them. That's the risk they took.
Known company. They sort of had hands off on that one. And now the Russians are saying, nothing you do that's related to defense. Nothing you do that's related.
Chris is going to post a posting by President Trump in the past hour, and I'll read it. It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense, but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly, this is the second part of it, crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Regardless, this is a war that would never have happened.
It worked out actually pretty well because it did reduce the risk, of nuclear war. Biden stepping back from the brink on a number of occasions kept us out of a nuclear war. How did that work out? I'd say pretty good. I'm not happy with Biden because, of course, he got us into that war when he could have avoided it. So all that, okay, is reprehensible. I think the blood of all of the Ukrainians who've been killed, one of the pairs of hands that is due to. There's no question about that. But in not allowing Ukraine to have the longer range missiles to attack Russia on a wholesale basis, he prevented the escalation to a nuclear war. So that worked out pretty well.
And if I were president, zero chance. Interesting times ahead, President BJT. It's hard to read or to analyze what he means when he writes like this. You think he means that Ukraine has no chance of winning? Or do you think he means it's about time for Ukraine to attack Russia?
I think it means Ukraine has no chance of winning. It's funny. Everybody thinks, well, Russia's attacking Ukraine, therefore Russia's not attacking Ukraine. Ukraine still exists. There's parties in Kiev. There's parties in Odessa. Western Ukraine, much of it runs around as if there is no war. There's electricity. The parliament meets in a parliamentarian building. The president meets. Foreign dignitaries arrive. If Russia was at war with Ukraine, which Russia would be if Ukraine was to carry out long-range strikes against Russia, Ukraine would not exist anymore. It would cease to exist. No matter what Zelensky does, the first time he throws one of his new falutin British-made missiles into Moscow is the last time, because then Kiev disappears. I'm not saying in a nuclear holocaust. I'm saying Oreshnik and other advanced systems that have now been deployed. The Russians have been playing, very tolerant strategic games with the Ukraine.
So today there was a report. I forget where it was, a YouTube report, but what the report said was that Putin had vetoed the use of the Oreshnik to destroy the decision-making capacity of Ukraine. So he vetoed an attack on the center of Kyiv, using those missiles, the Oreshnik missiles. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? The answer is because Putin is both an ethical and a wise man. When I say he's ethical, what I mean is he recognized a moral constraint that kind of destruction to the center of governmental power was going too far, that it would create a chaos inside of Ukraine that would not be good either for Ukraine or for Russia. Putin knows he has to live with Ukraine. He's not after the destruction of Ukraine. He knows he has to live with them following this war. Yes, they will be a state that is greatly reduced and they will be neutralized. But Russia still has to live with them. So he recognizes certain constraints on what Russia can do. Therefore, he vetoed the use of the Oreshniks. Now, undoubtedly, if he had used the Oreshnik, he would have assassinated the current leaders of Ukraine, including Zelensky, because nothing would have survived that kind of an attack. But he said no to it, even though he was under pressure to use that. The issue that Scott is raising here is, or the implication of what Scott is saying here is the question, raises the issue. Would Putin change his mind if more long-range missiles are shot into Russia by Zelensky at this point? Is there a limit to the restraint and patience of Putin? Because, if there is not, then the horror of the Oreshniks is going to be visited on the capital of Ukraine. It's on the brink now. It's on the knife edge. Putin, okay, is not a dictator. If severe damage is visited on Moscow by those missiles, Putin will be under extreme pressure to use the Oreshniks in Kyiv, and that will be horrible for Ukraine and for the future prospects of peace in that area.
He's giving them every chance in this war. On the front line, yeah, they kill a lot of Ukrainians, but they don't do the damage to Ukraine that could be done. And frankly, if you want to win the war rapidly, should be done, because they honestly view Ukraine as the same, as a branch of the same tree. The Slavic Brotherhood, the Russians and Ukrainians, one people that have branched off. The Russians aren't in the business of killing their brothers, their cousins, their uncles. They respect the history, and so they've taken very kid glove approach towards Ukraine. And Donald Trump doesn't understand this.
Right.
Because if he thinks that Ukraine can strike Russia and not pay a consequence, he's higher than a kite.
Let me ask you a technical question here. What is a security guarantee? I mean, in the case of Austria, which is a terrific model here, in 1955, the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, entered into a treaty with Austria, and it required for Austria's permanent neutrality, among other things. The security guarantee consisted of a Soviet official physically present and permanently a member of the Austrian Security Council. It sounded outrageous. They all went for it. Fantastic effect. The Soviet troops were gone. Austria flourished economically, politically, and stayed neutral. The security guarantee was not troops. It was a Soviet official in the hierarchy of the Austrian government. When the British and President Trump talk about a security guarantee, I don't think that's what they're talking about. I think they're talking about troops.
Yeah, the British are. I don't think Trump knows what a security guarantee is, but let's. They all say that they want it to be like Article 5 of the NATO Charter.
Well, the Russians will never accept that. Lavrov could not have been clearer.
Right, but read it. Article 5 isn't what everybody claims it to be. Article 5 requires no action. It's not. Article 5, as defined during the Cold War, was backed up by a NATO that had front-loaded the approval sequences, so that you had troops on the ground in West Germany ready to surge from barracks to fight. They didn't need to call back to their home governments and get permission. It had all been front-loaded. But then the Cold War ended, and all those permissions went away, and all those troops went away. They went back to the garrisons. And now their economies are, focused on other things. Article 5 just says that if an attack against one will be considered an attack against all, and all member states will consider what their options could be, not will be, could be, including military. But there's no guarantee of a military option. There's no guarantee of any response. Such measures shall be terminated. Well, that's the Security Council, but the parties, such actions as it deems necessary,
right,
including the use of armed force.
But the very thought of this language, I think, would be rejected by the Russians, as I read what Foreign Minister Lavrov said.
It has been rejected by the Russians. But what I'm trying to say is Article 5 isn't what people think it is anyway. So
agree with you on that.
But now when they speak about it, every time you ask the European, for instance, the French.
Okay, so that's as far as we have to go tonight with that. The proper security guarantee for Ukraine, in this particular situation, is probably the kind of security guarantee that the Austrians and Russians had. Have a Russian as part of the Ukrainian Security Council. And then no actions will be taken that can jeopardize the security, of Ukraine. Because the Russian, who's part of the Security Council, will be able to block any such action. And there will be no temptation for the Russians to change that situation. I'll check again on your final comments.
As you see, you have people here.
Yes, I see Mr. Wonderful is here. Hello, everyone. Hello, comrades. I just got back from seeing a movie. I hope it was a good one, Mr. Wonderful. And Devora asks, my daughter, of course, says, why did he do that? Why did he do it? Because he has a conscience. That's the fact of the matter. Steve G2 says, sounds like a final solution. It's not a final solution for Ukraine in that sense, but it's a final solution if you want to get rid of the decision-making capacity, okay, of Ukraine. So it's a final solution in that particular sense. But he's been avoiding that particular final solution because he knows it's not a viable thing to do if you're looking for a post-war situation where everybody can live together. That's it. D, I think we're just about done for the night, aren't we? Unless you have
Yes.
some comments you
Yes,
would like
we
to.
are. No, I don't have anything to add. We brought forth a lot of information.
Yeah, there was a lot of information tonight, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. That was good. I worked hard on this show. I worked hard to fit it in the time. We're only 1 minute and 5 seconds overtime at this point. So I think that was pretty good considering all the things we had to cover.
Yes. There's so much going on every week.
Yes. So everybody, thank you for coming. I will be back on Tuesday. Dee will be back before then, I'm sure. So what are your plans, Dee?
I really can't say right now. I have to see how things go.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll both be looking to see if there's anything new with respect to Iran.
Yes.
If there are any confirmations of further attacks on Israel, which we've heard some rumors about.
Mhm.
But anyway, I guess that's all for tonight, folks. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for putting the show together. And we'll be seeing you again on Tuesday. And do you know how many times I say on Wednesday night, I'll say I'll be joining Joe Firestone on Thursday? And it's like I have to remember. So how many weeks have you not been on Thursday night? And I still have that habit of saying that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think I'm coming back on Thursday night every time soon. Anytime soon, because okay, I have something else I'm working on now. It's in the area, okay, of AI, and what it relates to is the development of regulators, on AI agents, okay, in order to ensure that the AIs follow something called the Sustainability Code, which is something that a collaborator of mine and I had worked out some years ago. But recently it occurred to us that it would be great if the AIs were to internalize the Sustainability Code in their operations. So I'm working to see if that is a practical thing to do. And that's where, among other things, my Thursday nights are going.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, well, you're getting a lot in on Tuesday and Saturday. So.
well, that's good, I think. So
Yes.
thank you for coming, Dee.
Yes, thank you for having me. And
It was a great pleasure, as usual.
yes, enjoy your day tomorrow.
Yeah, you have a great day, too. We intend to have a great day tomorrow.
That's good. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. It was
Okay.
a great show.
Yeah, I thought it was really good too.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Everyone.
And good night. Oh, one thing. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share, share, share. Please subscribe to Joe Firestone on YouTube and
Yes.
follow him on X.
Right, and follow me on Facebook too, even though I wasn't able to actually do Facebook today for an unknown reason. I don't know why, but I suspect I'll be finding out over the next few days.
Yes.
So good night again, everybody.
Good night.
And we'll see you soon. And that's the end of the stream, everybody. I should get some outro music here.
There must have been some big accident or something because those helicopters